I guess in a weird way, I like not necessarily want to like explain myself, but like, sure, is that like, it is a weird thing about like my identity in that like, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, and actually like I talked about this pretty recently in one that like hasn't been released yet, but it's like, it's difficult whenever like I didn't grow up in Venezuela. I don't have like a direct sort of cultural association. And for pretty much all of my like adolescence and growing up, like it wasn't a priority either, because of just like the fact that like the social pressure of having to fit in as a non-white kid growing up in Oklahoma, but also the fact that like I've grown up undocumented. And so there was always this paranoia about like, if people like discover me, I will, you know, get deported or
precarious,
something.
yeah.
And so it was always like that, like you said, the colonizer mentality was in there in kind of a life or death sort of way, in that like, if I don't fit in, like I could literally be ripped away from the life that I have here.
From the only home you've known. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it is weird, because it's like, yeah, my adolescence was kind of like founded in that. And so now as an adult, I'm like, I don't have a lot of Venezuela in myself to hold on to. And so it's not so much that I like don't value that I am Venezuelan. It's just that I find that culture in general is kind of fluid, and who I am isn't necessarily based on where I'm from, but it's just like what I am and what I'm doing and what I consume. And so like the weird part about it is that like I identify way more with like Radiohead than I do like salsa music.
But is Radiohead white culture? And that's where I was getting at, is this colonial mentality and conflation of whiteness with certain things. Like Radiohead isn't, I mean, like we can joke that it's like white boy stuff, but it's not really white stuff. And like, I mean, they're from England, but so it's not like white and American. But a lot of the things that you said, and the only reason I bring this up is because I think it was the last one I listened to. I listened to a good handful of your podcasts, but right before I listened to the Troy Anthony Small one, and you conflated. You said at one point you're 90% white, and then you're like, but my driver's license says temporary. So you were equating like permanent residency or citizenship with whiteness, like that being lacking. And I'm not saying you were consciously doing, I think going back to colonial mentality, it's a subconscious or implicit association that's negative and anti-brown. And when I say anti-brown, I don't mean like you're a racist or anything. I think it's driven into all of us, including myself. Like I've had to overcome it. I still have to overcome it. I can't recommend that book by E.J.R. David called Brown Skin, White Minds enough. It specifically talks about Filipino Americans and Filipinos specifically living abroad. But like it's a Phil-Am thing, yet it's really broadly contextualizing it and can be modulated to other ethnic minorities. I think especially like Venezuelan Americans as yourself. You don't have to identify with Venezuela, but more of understanding that your position is of a hyphenated American. Whether or not, and that's an imposed identity put on yourself. And you said like, I'm white passing. And I'm like, well, maybe if that's how you see yourself and that's how you view yourself, that's fine. That's your identity. That's how you can break it down. But like, I have a feeling, you said you never experienced a racial like incident. And I'm like, you know,
I still haven't.
Power to you. Maybe you have, and you just colonial mentality. I think it runs deep.
Yeah, I don't know.
It ran deep for me, man. I've been where you are, and that's not to say like I'm better or worse. Like I've been there. I've been very much like protectionist with, patriarchal white culture, because it's a survival thing, as you said. So, do you consider yourself to be a person of color, or do you consider yourself to be a white person?
I am a person of color. And I think that's just like I said before, is, you know, my name is still Santiago Ramones, and like I'm not gonna, like, I can't show people, to use the driver's license thing again, I can't show people my driver's license and be like, I'm, you know, American, but like I'm not. And I, like, so far I can't be.
But you're conflating still whiteness with Americanness.
Yeah, and that's a funny thing, but like,
and the funny thing is, you were talking to a black man. You were talking to a black man, and he didn't call you out for that. And I think it's because it runs so deep, you know. And you at one point brought up, and I just listened to this. This is the only reason why I can like recall this stuff. Is you brought up like New Orleans being a melting pot and like Creoles and stuff, and I'm like, well, okay, but these mixed race individuals, when that was, you know, a thing, it still is a thing, but like when the specific time period I think you were talking about, when that began to happen, and we were thinking politically, they still didn't have power. You know, they still didn't have the privilege. They were still seen as like second class. And there might have been a colorist hierarchy within that. And in the Filipino community, there's a colorist hierarchy with that as well. But thinking, right, like you're conflating whiteness with Americanness, and you're conflating like Radiohead with whiteness. I'm like, I know plenty of people of color that love Radio. I love Radiohead. Like, you know, like I'm down with Radiohead. That doesn't make me, that doesn't like pure, like point me on the spectrum to more whiteness. Does that make sense? And so like white culture, sure, it can be a thing, but like American culture is different from white culture. And so I think having the association implicitly with that is a more positive way to look at yourself in the mirror, whether or not you see yourself brown or white or whatever, but understanding that like white culture is different from like French culture or something, you know, like, or like British culture, you know, like the,
I think I'm kind of identifying it a little bit, and this dialogue is good because I like, it helps me to sort of identify those unchecked like biases in myself. But it's I think it might be a language thing, in that for in Spanish, the word gringo doesn't mean white people necessarily. It can, and a lot of the time does, but gringo actually just means American. And so like more often the word gringo was used to refer to white people, but it also just means American. And so maybe that's where like the association is happening in my head, that like I am basically a gringo, in that I've grown up American, and that barrier between gringo being white and gringo being American is like still not being clear to my head, I guess.
That's funny that you, and that's a really great example, but flying, you know, going with that language. In the same interview, you said, like, there's not a trace of Spanish accent on me. And there was like a pride to that. So it goes back to this ideology of quote unquote, like semantically, we all have an accent. We don't need to get into that. But you have like a non-Spanish English dialect, right? And that does not make you better or worse than having a Spanish influenced dialectic accent, right? Or dialect, excuse me. I'm screwing up the words. In the same way that like Troy was talking about dialect, you didn't use dialect, you used accent. He used the term dialect. And I think that's interesting because we think about, or he used the term, not dialect, diction. And I think you can have, like, I'm over enunciating certain things because this is a podcast and we don't have any visual aid. And so I need to be like a little bit crisper, you know. My diction is maybe a little bit better than if we were face to face, just having a conversation. That doesn't mean I'm whiteifying myself, or we use the term code switching, there is a term called code switching, which is it's more specifically, I believe, through the articles and research that I've read, affected with African American English Vernacular, or AAEV, in that you code switch and sound white, like there's a white voice in professional settings. And Troy was alluding to this in certain ways. And what was funny is throughout the second interview, his like kind of New York accent started coming out a little bit more, and he started using like slightly more slang. And I was like, so he's breaking down this barrier, and he's kind of acknowledged this code switching. And so is it seeping out because of like a subconscious like awareness of code switching, and you're talking about it, and so he's switching back to like maybe a more amicable or friendly, I shouldn't say friendly, a casual way of talking. And so again, you have this conflation with non-Spanish accents being American and being better. And so when we look at asymmetrical relationships, when we look at power dynamics, you are reinforcing if I may say, like a white supremacist system, in that you are favoring things that you code as white as being better versus things you code as being black, being inferior. There's a great implicit association test that my partner's white, and so I got her to do it, and we did it at the same time. And it has words like on the left column, it has American, but some letters are missing, so you have to fill in the blank and like fill out the word American. And then on the right column, it has Filipino. It was a Filipino coded, or specifically one for Filipino stuff. So in the right column, it says Filipino, but a couple letters are missing. Then back in the left column and the row below it, it had like Washington, D.C. as the scrambled word, not scrambled, but like a couple letters missing. And then it had Manila, on and on and on, like several rows. And the last two rows, in the left column, it had white, and the right column, it had brown. And then in the bottom left, it had blank, 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 ERIOR. And in the bottom right, it had blank, 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 ERIOR. So the implicit association with her was, and it doesn't mean that she's racist. It doesn't mean anybody's racist if you think that. It just means we are being entrained in this culture. She went superior, inferior, without a single, like, she didn't skip a beat. And she was like, oh my God, I can't believe I did this. Funny enough, so there's colonial mentality, which I believe that you're working through right now. And on the opposite end of the spectrum is something called cultural mistrust. And this is a term used, and I'm not a psychologist or anything, but like broadly used in the psychology community regarding ethnic minorities or those with less power in a cultural setting. And I lean that way, and I'm trying to find equilibrium in that I have more distrust in systems and institutions. That doesn't mean I'm like an anarchist or anything, but I have a healthy skepticism about certain things. And so when I took the test, I put inferior, superior. So the white, and that doesn't mean that I'm anti-white racist. Like, I'm not against white people. That was just, wow, that's coded in me because I have cultural mistrust, which is a healthy skepticism based on experiences within my life. And I think if you go back in your life, and I'm not trying to like, I don't know your life or anything, but I think if you go back and review things and try to not protect those in power, you may find incidents of racially charged incidents. That's not to say that you're a victim. That's not to say like, oh, let's throw you a pity party. But I'm like, until I was 20, I was like, no, I haven't experienced any racism. And I'm like, oh my God, no, I have. And I was like going back and going like, wow, that happened and that happened and that happened. And I'm not, it's not victimhood. It's reclaiming some power based on these asymmetric relationships that are out of balance. And I don't hold any grudge or anything against anybody. It's like, I'm realizing this so that I may address it when it comes up. And I don't have this like paranoia when I go into a relationship or talk with somebody. I have an openness. But when something happens, and even to this day, like somebody could say something really egregiously racist to me or about somebody else, and I walk away from the conversation and I reflect on it later and go, whoa, that was kind of messed up. You know, like it doesn't mean that we're like super woke or like conscious about it 24/7, but it's this goal to be aware of these power dynamics and how we can address them.
And that's really cool because, like, yeah, in a weird way, to me, it doesn't feel like I'm defending the colonizer, or at least like not from where I am now. I also haven't listened to that podcast since it was made. So, and so it's like, did I do that? And so it is like, again, you earlier you said that like you were being hard on me or whatever, but like no, I think it's good to identify these things because I wouldn't have questioned it otherwise. And so like
when I listened to one,
this is a good thing to
I listened to one recently too. It was one of the newer music ones. It was a musician. I can't remember his name. It was a guy. But there was a part where you were like, I don't, and you said it earlier in this block of the podcast. You're like, I don't identify with Venezuelan stuff, and like my music has nothing to do with Venezuela. And I'm like, that also is an otherizing kind of like white perspective. And I'm not saying that you have a white perspective, but that is like this Eurocentric, white-centric, or not Eurocentric, but like an Anglo-white, Caucasian-centric thing of if it's Venezuelan-sounding music, it has to sound like Venezuelan music. It's like, no, Venezuelan American music is whatever music you're making through the lens that you're making it through. Like Filipino American music, there might be some like, indigenous references or things like that, but it doesn't sound like music, like ethnically stereotypical music of the Philippines. It's music of this space. I like to say that my music is of Asian America, which is not a place you can draw on a map. It's not something you can put borders around. It's just wherever my music exists. It's this music of my perspective and my experience. And so when you're otherizing Venezuelan music, you're like, well, the music I make growing up in American culture is just like, no, your experience as whatever is Venezuelan American music. It does not have to sound like, traditional historic Venezuelan music. And I think this comes from, as somebody who studied, we both are simpatico with this, we studied in like a Western conservatory style setting. We have musicology, which is historical musicology, quote unquote, and that is white European. Then we have ethnomusicology, which is brown people, right? And so just this hierarchy and this division that is still accepted today in 2021 is really deflating and damaging to our psyches, in that you're participating in this. And I'm not saying it's conscious, but you're like, well, my music doesn't sound like this, or, right? You're kind of like inferiorizing brownness.
I don't think that's the case. And I still kind of agree with what I'm saying. I think that there's a different framing in the communication because I think you're right in a manner of speaking, because it's like, yes, I am Venezuelan, and so the music that I make is Venezuelan. And so like, that's just not, I guess, the context necessarily that I was communicating in. It's more just that like I don't know. It's like the whenever you trace sounds to their roots. And so it's like, you can look at like West Coast hip hop versus East Coast hip hop and like identify that like, oh, this one sounds like West Coast hip hop. And you can like listen to the things in it that sound like it. And these are the things that make East Coast hip hop sound like it does. I think that's more the realm that I was thinking about, in that like, if you like sort of clinically, I guess, go like, what does Venezuelan music sound like? I think I would go to like the source, which is like people born in Venezuela making music in Venezuela generations over. And like that context, like you can identify qualities in that music that like Venezuelan styles have. And so I don't know if like, I think that's more of the way that I mean, is that like, I don't know if I have Venezuelan styles in my music any more than I have like Atlanta trap styles in my music. Does that make sense?
I think it does, but it doesn't, because it's still stereotypical, and you're still otherizing, and you're still saying like, well, Venezuelan is this, and you're putting it in a box. And that's where I'm like, I didn't say you're a Venezuelan. I said you're Venezuelan American music, and I'm not trying to like prescribe music onto yourself either. I'm just saying there is potentially like the colonial mentality of like anti-brown or anti-X, Y, or Z. And it's not to be like anti-American or anti-white. It's to build a positive ethnic and cultural identity that includes both and that's the tough thing. That's the tough equilibrium that I think we're all coming in. So you're reinforcing, in my opinion, some relatively malicious ideas that then culturally within your sphere of, I don't want to say influence, but like your friend, your family, your framework, the people in your atmosphere kind of covertly or overtly reinforce, and you covertly or overtly reinforce. So it triggers automatic thoughts, and you're trying to compare it to like East Coast and West Coast hip hop. Well, there's the question of chicken or the egg. Did they want to differentiate themselves musically? Of course. Did it come through technology? Did it come through regional things? Before we had Spotify and YouTube, like it took a lot more capital and effort and time to release music. So it was more isolationist then when we're talking about 90s stuff, like 90s and late 80s East Coast and West Coast hip hop, which is near and dear to my heart. But like, and today we're reinforcing those because that's the clear origin of it. And so, you listen to like Dave East and he sounds very like, Spanish Harlem, and you listen to like Kendrick Lamar and he sounds very West Coast because of the predecessors before that. But it was this isolationist thing and this desire to be different, this desire to differentiate. But now that we live in the 21st century in 2021, like how does that affect it? Are we still trying to otherize? And I feel like the East Coast, West Coast to kind of poke a hole in it, like that was the desired effect. Versus now, like trying to say like, I don't know, like anti. I'll let you. I've said enough. Come for me, man. Come for it.
No, well, like I'm trying to see the differences in communication because this is really intriguing to me. That like because I don't think, or at least as far as I can tell, I never used any sort of positive or negative descriptors for West Coast or East Coast hip hop in the same way that I use positive or negative descriptors to say.
And I don't think you had a positive or negative. I'm talking about like the way you view Venezuela. Like let's go back to the Venezuelan versus like like American or non-Venezuelan stuff. And you're like, there's certain markers in there. There's certain tropes, if you will. Like I don't.
Yeah.
I think you're right on some merit, and you're right about Atlanta trap music, and you're right about a lot of these other things. But like the fact that there are borders and boundaries around it that you're not willing to say, it's more of a philosophical and decontextualized thing of like, I think you have aspirations for whiteness, and I think that's fine if that's what you want to do. I do. And
cool.
And that's fine.
Like it's
you do you,
funny.
man.
It's funny.
I would love to do a play-by-play with your. I would do like the second Troy Small, Troy Anthony Small thing. Like that'd be fun.
Sure.
We shouldn't do that like not now, but like that'd be fun. Or having I would love to come back on with Troy and like have these conversations or somebody else.
Yeah.
That'd be a fun like roundtable discussion, and like. There were very positive and negative implicit associations. And whiteness with Americanness, citizenship with whiteness. And you were talking about the gringo, etymology of that. I think that's at play, but I don't think that's the source of everything, personally.
Sure. I mean, it's like an explanation. I can't say it's the source for everything, but like it's just a thought that I had. But like, I don't know. The more so I'm speaking in like terms of like qualities in things. Whenever you describe something as like bright or dark, or you describe something as like silky smooth or whatever, qualities that you could hear in music. I think that whenever you identify different stylistic choices, and some of them aren't choices, they just sort of happen, but like you can identify qualities in music without necessarily saying good or bad. It's just that it's things that are present in the music. I think that's something is that like, especially, you know, we're both composers, and like one of the things about, or at least from my education, is that like there are things that we're trying to evoke and we're trying to communicate something in the music, and we have this toolbox and we're pulling things out of it to achieve certain forms of communication or certain feelings or certain whatever it might be. And so that's more the realm that I'm speaking in, is that like if I was to try to make something in a certain style, there are qualities that I would lean into to make that happen. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm glad you went down this path, because this is a little easier to address now. So you're talking about education, which includes things like music theory, musicology, right? And training, technique, all of this stuff. Well, it's this very Eurocentric thing and this monocultural approach to education and to what is music. You know, one of your guests is like, you know, when you realize all music is the same, they're like, they all use the same notes. I'm like, do they? Giving them a hard time. Yeah. But so this monocultural approach to things, and then saying, well, I have tools in my tool bag to create something in a certain style. Well, number one, you have a monocultural tool bag, not to, and I'm sure you have like different experiences and yada, 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 yada. But if we're looking from, and this is just to talk more broadly about like classically quote unquote trained musicians, which include both of us. So we can speak from like a shared educational perspective. And probably find some listeners that also fall into this category as well. When you say styles and you have a tool bag, well, it's a monocultural tool bag. And then you're saying styles. Well, who determined those styles? How are we determining those styles? If we're listening from a white-centric perspective and a colonial mindset, until we decolonize and find those things to be not inferior but equal to, and not have negative association, implicit associations with those, we can't truly see those and look past and see the forest for the trees and be like, oh, well, I can create music as this experience that is not, that does not follow these tropes. And I believe also that too often musicians boil music down to like pitch and rhythm and don't think about mood, aesthetic, texture, timbre, sculpting, things like that, and looking at things more broadly from an affect, like an AFFECT, and not an effect, like the effect of using certain pitch collections, not the affect, like how it makes us feel and what it invokes, because you use that term evoke. And when we look at it from this perspective of Eurocentric music or white-centric music, then we will always see it in that way. And that's why like music theory just drives me crazy. I'm decent at music theory. I'm good at it. You know, like I could do the European stuff. Like I went through the trainings like ad nauseum, but just this obsession with like, common practice period, music theory, and like functional harmony and tonality is just, I see so many young composers like, well, I'm writing this and it's tonal and I have to have this sonority or this chord next. I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Like, you don't have to follow these limitations and these rules, because it's a really detrimental system that sets us up as brown individuals to feel lesser about music. We literally have a different, and oftentimes, I won't say that. We have two different classifications of historical musicology, and just that term meaning it's historical, it has impacted history, and then ethnomusicology, this other stuff. You know, it's just decolonizing ourselves, decolonizing our minds, and decolonizing our work to feel as though we can be on equal footing with, you know, European music of long dead people. But, you know, just the stylistic stuff, like I'm like, come on, man, you know, there's nothing wrong with it, but
I still don't understand.
You still don't understand?
I don't understand like what there are differences in music. That's a statement that can be made. Yes.
Yeah.
And there are qualities in music that we can use and we can use different words to describe those qualities to identify those differences in music. Yes?
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's all I'm saying.
Sure. And I'm just saying broaden your horizons a little bit. That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying.
In what way?
I would love to do a play-by-play with you for some stuff. Just because I'm like, just the implicit associations. I think now that we're having a conversation and you're more conscious of the language that you're probably going to use, that the knee-jerk reactions aren't necessarily going to come out. You know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to throw that much shade or anything. I'm just trying to be like, it breaks my heart when I hear, especially young men of color and young women of color, be so negative with certain aspects of brownness, and so like aspirational with whiteness. And I don't find anything wrong with whiteness. I feel like we're all equal, and that's the whole thing. I don't want negative around whiteness or maleness or heterosexuality or anything. It's finding things that are not that being equal, you know? Anyway.
Well, again, that's where I feel like our communication is breaking down, because like I'm still not seeing it. Like I still don't see where, like, you know, if I look at some older music that I've done and I'm like, oh, I don't like that as much because blank. And I don't know if there's anything in there that maybe is like, I'm putting myself down for like not being white enough, or like, I don't think that's what it is in me.
I don't know if musically,
like, I think
there's a thing. It's the language that was used that had just negative associations or positive associations with certain demographics. And that's just the thing. It's the most American thing, you know, like we're both raised in American culture. It's a very American thing. And so when confronted with this, it really is, we get into a defensive position. And I've been in a very defensive position with some of my language too, of associating like citizenship with whiteness, associating like quality of music with like very historically Eurocentric standards within classical music. It's just really hard to tear down those barriers. And it's just difficult. It's too difficult to have in like a 2-hour conversation, which is, I am applauding us for trying. And like, it's one of those things of it takes a lot of vulnerability and a lot of like really deep conversations to have with yourself and with other people to really understand how like something as simple as like when you said there's not a trace of an accent and that makes you passing. There's nothing wrong with saying that, but there is this association with non-Spanish accents being, there's no doubt that it's passing, like you can pass, but there's something implicitly negative about one aspect and implicitly positive about another aspect. And that's not a bad thing, because that's what you are feeling in that moment, but it's about addressing it so that in the future with yourself or other people, or we become positive about things. It's like body positivity, like, right. We're talking a lot about this in the media and culture, and like people's bodies not being hard on yourself if you're not super thin or super ripped or super whatever, like loving yourself for whoever you are. And I think when there is a negative association with the English language or accents, that can make people feel inferior. For example, like my father has to white code when he goes into work or finding employment, and he still has a thick Filipino accent. And that doesn't mean that he is lesser, and I used to think that. And I think a lot of Filipinos do, like you have an Americanized accent or a non-Filipino accent, and it means you're better. And that's a really like, that's a heavy thing to think about. Like that we grade people on this, and it's not about diction, and clarity of communication or eloquence with the English language. It's literally about the mechanical delivery of it based on experience and based on upbringing, nationality, race, culture, all of these things. And that's what I'm finding to be enlightening about this conversation, and just why I felt the need to bring it up in the last block was like, it's a negative thing to do. You know, it's, and those are your opinions and thoughts, and you have every right to those opinions and thoughts. But like, man, if it's that kind of like shoot from the hip, easy for you to say in one podcast, like, what are the other things that you kind of value and devalue? Not you specifically, but like you in general, like us in general.
Yeah. From that point, I understand.
Yeah, that's what I was going, and not necessarily with like your work, your music, your aesthetic, or anything like that. I was literally talking about like coded language and like the implicit associations that we have. And I think it runs really deep in music, because if you study music at the college level, or you study music classically at whatever age, typically it comes from Western canon. And there's nothing wrong with that canon. I'm not devaluing that canon. I'm trying to value non-Western music and raise it to the level, going back to the football field like argument, like, okay, Filipino and Filipino American music can also take a step forward, you know, right there with like German music of, you know, the 19th century.
Well, yeah, but that's, again, I think that it's just like a different form of communication that I hadn't identified in the context by which, like, I haven't associated my own music as Venezuelan American music, because I like, that's just not a vector in my brain yet. And now it is, because of this conversation. And it's like, oh, cool. Like, I guess I do make Venezuelan American music, but I didn't know that was a way that I could classify things. And nor do I like seek to do that necessarily. Like, I think
that's part of the toxicity.
Like, I don't know.
So, right. I do. I firmly believe this. Like, you're like, oh, I didn't know that until now. Well, and this goes back to like you saying stylistic things. You're painting yourself in a box and going, Venezuelan American music must sound like this. It's like, no, the identity is imposed upon you. You can't help who you're born to, where you're born, all of these things that you have no control over.
Right. It's the chicken egg thing.
Right. So it's this imposed identity, and it can be a burden, or it can be something that you champion, and it can be something that you elect. And it's up to you. You can choose to be neutral on it. You can choose to reject it, or you can choose to elect it. You can choose to do whatever you want with it. But it's about bringing this to the conversation and bringing this in your own mind, and the implicit negative associations. And again, we might call them, they're called microaggressions, right? And at the end of the day, like, sticks and stones, right? But microaggressions do have long-reaching effects when we think about how somebody feels, right? It reinforces things. Chicken or the egg? Do stereotypes come from fact, or do they come from insensitive things, right? Like, I don't want to throw out a racial stereotype because I don't want to be offensive, but like, there's plenty of them that are just not productive and they're not accurate. And it's because of quote unquote microaggressions, or because cultural entrainment. And so again, having a negative implicit association with brownness and a positive with whiteness, it could and should be positive with both, is all I'm saying. You know, it doesn't have to be a binary choice. It's both and, or multiple and.
Sure. Yeah. I guess I haven't identified that there is a chicken or egg or whatever. Like, I think that's the difference here. And that, like, I guess, one, thank you for like showing me a realm of thinking in that way, because it really is like, I make music and I classify it in ways just that people classify music. Like, I have an album out on Spotify, and that is ambient music, and that is as close to whatever, like, not that there has to be a classification, but there has to be a classification because it's like the database of music requires something to organize it by.
That's different because it's an acultural association, right?
Right.
And it doesn't have a power dynamic. At least not in like detrimental ways. Like there's no power holder. There's no asymmetrical relationship with ambient music versus something. And I'm not saying versus in like a competitive way. I'm saying in a comparative way, shall we say, where there is for like whiteness and racial minorities. And I'm not saying it's a positive thing. I'm saying it's a reality of there is a comparative issue. And I think you're also alluding to some comparative issues too. And I'm playing into it because that's what we're talking about. But like you're using this kind of reductio ad absurdum, like, well, I labeled it as ambient. Yeah, that's totally fine. And that's a way for us to communicate things. But anyway, yeah, I'll let you say something because I feel like I ramble a lot.
Well, no, it's interesting because again, I'm trying to understand, and this is like, I don't want you to take my discomfort as like I don't know, annoyance or whatever. Like
No.
This is really like a place I haven't gone to yet, and so that's what's so fun about this.
I love it. These conversations are uncomfortable, and that is necessary for growth for you and I. I have these conversations all the time with people, and they're never comfortable. I've had countless conversations in person, in private, in public, and wherever about this. Like this is something I'm very passionate about, and something that every time I have the platform to do so, I talk about it because it should be talked about until we correct this problem. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm like, let's bathe in the discomfort. Let's bask in it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and that's a weird thing. I don't know if like, so then because of the thing that you said about like having the toolbox, if you will, do you see it as a toolbox or are you just doing things? Because like I know that whenever I make musical choices, they have intent, and I know in some ways as to why I'm making those choices to like achieve a certain thing that I'm going for in the music. And there's definitely times where something unconscious will happen, but like the toolbox is still there. So like I guess I want to understand how your approach is with that musically.
Yeah, it's a good question. I like the toolbox. I'm glad that you brought that metaphor up, because the thing that I always say about composers, when like somebody that's not usually a musician or you know, not a creative artist or identify as a creative artist, they're like, so why music? Why compose? Like, what does a composer do exactly? Like, I know you write music and you like do this or that. It's like, what do you do? And I say composers are good listeners and great problem solvers. So using the toolbox example, we identify a problem and we use our toolbox to solve it. Our metaphorical toolbox. We don't really have a toolbox. Well, sometimes we do, but you know, and going back to the first conversation about sound versus music, opening and broadening your horizons and not categorizing it in black and white terms of like music versus sound, music versus noise, tone versus noise, this versus that, this or that. It's both, and allows you to expand your toolbox. In the same way that if you become only entrained with like an undergraduate theory 1 through 5 or theory 1 through 4, depending on the sequence, training of Western tonality or harmonic, functional harmony and common practice period stuff, that is your toolbox. And it's not limited, but it is limited. And until you decide to add to the toolbox or utilize other tools, then you're kind of stuck with that. I don't know if this is answering your question a little bit. And there's universal things.
I guess
like
whatever your approach is.
Yeah.
I want to know.
Okay.
About
So,
you.
well, I mean, like, there's a hammer. Like you can use a hammer for a lot of things: to hammer a nail, to dislodge a nail, to tap something into place. But if we expand our vocabulary and we see things not in a hierarchical sense, it becomes a little bit equal, right? We're not saying this is sound, this is noise, this is music, this is good, this is bad. This is a tool. Sound is a tool, right? Like,
did it seem like I was implying that noise is bad?
I was just using that as an example. I'm not coming for you in that way. Like, I think we're similar in that understanding. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's just a decent example. Yeah. It's a decent example that a lot of people have of like, that's noise. Well, that's this. Well, that's tone. That's music. That's in tune. Well, no, that's equal temperament. No, that's just intonation. That's 24 tone equal temperament. Oh, that's some kind of microtonal thing. That's whatever, right? Like, anything's fair game.
Yeah. But then do you classify? Does it matter?
I think classification can help us navigate when we distribute, when we kind of put this out into the world. So classifying it as ambient music or Western classical music or whatever, like Baroque music. It's Baroque music and we understand that classification, or it's pop music, or it's rock music, or it's hip hop, or it's like acid jazz. Like, it doesn't mean that we have to conform to these ideals, but once we create, then we can say, okay, how can we, in the case of Spotify, like, it's like, give us like a genre and then like a style or like a subgenre or something, right? When you release, and then it's like list a few artists that are similar, right? So it kind of forces us to do that. And again, we have to make the conscious choice of abiding by that, but that doesn't mean that we can't create something in the process of making that is not more open. I think there's a big difference between creating or be in the creative process and the product. When it's ready for Spotify, it's done. I mean, I guess you can edit it in some way. You can take it down and change it, but it's done. You're probably paying money to put it out.
I mean, Kanye tried to like edit an album, so I guess you can now too. So
I mean, you can. It's just not. I mean, he has a lot of power and money to do that. So there's probably some difference too. Like,
I'm pretty sure he's like pretty broke now, but
oh really? Well, I mean, he's got a name though. I mean, he can.
Yeah, that's something.
Yeah, I was on a compilation album and it. Yeah, they screwed up the track and they credited me with somebody else's track and somebody else with my track, and it took like months to fix it. And I was like, come on, like this shouldn't be that hard. But there's red tape and hoops to jump through. Sorry to cut you off. But.
I guess I want to understand a little more of your creative process of like whenever you make decisions that, because like, I don't know, whenever I'm making something, I will choose a sound deliberately for something. Like I want a pad type sound, and that's already like, you know, pigeonholing a lot of things into what I can possibly make with that thing. And so like, but I also know that that's the decision that I'm making. So like, I don't know if I've fully experienced like a true freedom, whatever that means. I also don't believe in free will, so that's a weird way of communicating, but I know that there's always something influencing my decision, and that there's always something that I'm going for, even whenever I don't know what it is that I'm making.
Yeah. So do you have like a direct question? You want me to just riff on that? Okay. I'm sorry. I kind of got stung when you were like, I don't believe in free will. And I was like, so how are you making these decisions? That's just a semantical thing. We can touch on that.
Sure,
but,
sure.
We are driven by these decisions, and we're driven by categorizing sounds. And for me, I mean, I guess it depends. If you're talking about like a pad sound, you're probably talking from some kind of database. Even if you're editing it, like you're looking at some kind of source, digital source.
Yeah, well, I mean, whenever you can like
Yeah,
build a
yeah, yeah.
synth
It's still
sound from scratch and adjust the
yeah, it's still
ADSR
from like
and all
some
that
kind of
stuff.
source or palette material where you're stacking these things.
Sometimes I'll just start with a sine wave.
Yeah, and then you manipulate it. So it's still a source. There's still a source. For me, I work very in the analog world, converting it to digital, and then usually back and forth. Even if I'm doing like notated concert music, like I do everything by hand, and then I digitize it later. Like I write scores by hand and all this. So for me, the decision, like I labor over it quite a bit, and I really explore it. Like I'll spend an entire 8-hour session recording. There's a piano over here, so I'm pointing. Recording piano, and the same like 3-second thing. I'll spend like hours doing it until I get it right, and I don't feel like manipulating it digitally in post. Right? I want to capture it raw, like in the analog form with whatever mic setup I have. And sometimes the mic setup's wrong, and I'm like, oh, I want something dirty, or I want something really clean, or I want this, or I want to run it through this effect before it hits the converter, you know, the interface, before it's like digitized. I want to have the sound most like what I want. So for me, those are limitations, but I lean into them and I make them work for me, or at least I try to make them work for me. They don't always work for me, but and sometimes I get stubborn and caught in my own like game.
Yeah. there's I mean, I guess like the bigger question then becomes, it's like, how do you know that, like you said, you mess with it for this, 3-second thing, you mess with it until it's right. And I noticed the use of the word right, because
yeah,
like as a composer, we know when it's like, that's it. I don't know what it is, but I know that is.
Thanks for calling me on that. What is right? I don't know. Until I find that it works. And to kind of not to like defer from that, sometimes I'll spend several hours on like a really short thing. And then as I'm layering, I'm like, man, that thing that I recorded like for 4 hours, that doesn't work anymore. So then it's wrong. When I recontextualize it with newer stuff, it may lose, I don't want to say value, but it does lose its contextual value. And I go, I can do better. Critical self-awareness. Like I'm like, that doesn't work, or I got to let it go. That's giving up.
It's so hard to decide what you want, especially so many times when you don't actually know what you want.
Yeah.
That was the end of that thought. Sorry.
No, I agree. I agree. It's hard to let something go. Because at some point you'll just edit, and it becomes something completely new. So at a certain point, you just got to go. I let it go. I don't have this like magnum opus complex where everything has to be perfect, and it's my one big piece or my one big album or something. It's like, this is good. This is a snapshot of what I've done, and it sounds good in some way, shape, or form. My next project will address this or that or the other, right? I don't know. That's how I view it. It kind of in this just like fleeting way.
Yeah. I've always described it, and I don't know if you see it this way too, but it's like chiseling away at the marble that isn't the statue. And so it's like, so sometimes you're just trying a whole bunch of different things, and it's like, I know that that's not right, and I don't know what right is, but whenever I find it, I'll know that that's the statue.
Yeah. I'm glad you called me on that word, right. Because I think I say that too often. Does this work contextually? Maybe is a better way to phrase that. Because just because it's not right for that piece or that track or that whatever doesn't mean it's not right for something else. Was that different? You ever watch Different Strokes? That show?
I haven't. No.
It was an '80s show. Well, the theme song is it takes different strokes, right? What might be right for you may not be right for some. There's a line in it. So when I think about right versus wrong, that's like a cultural thing that I think about. So it's contextually quote unquote right, but just it contextually works.
What's the struggle then that becomes like, what's the hard part of discovery or creation. Cause like, I don't know. I feel like for me, whenever I am searching for the statue within the marble, to continue to use that metaphor, it is like maybe it's because of the education that I've received that I do have this sort of context of like using the toolbox to like describe or locate the thing. And it's like, well, this isn't where I want to be going. What other tools can I pull out to achieve this thing that I'm going for? And so it's like, I know that there's like a whole bunch of, there's like books about like creative methods and stuff and trying different things and, you know, being upside down or like going out for a walk and all that sort of stuff that like people say that like really does somehow help the creative process. And so it's like, does that stuff work for you? Do you have a different approach with that?
I think what you were mentioning, like hanging, you say hanging upside down?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I think a lot of those creative processes, you know, that I've read are like, it's pretty much getting you out of your comfort zone, like physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever, just getting you out of your comfort zone. Because then going back to the thing of composers are great listeners and great problem solvers, you're having to solve this problem of discomfort. And what do you find comfort in? For me, it's music. For me, it's sound. For me, it's creating that world. So how do I kind of like find my life raft back to my comfortable, like my comfort zone musically? So if I put myself in an uncomfortable position, and that could be limitations. Like I've done pieces where I just play piano, and I'm not a great pianist. I'm not terrible. I'm not good though, you know? So if I can make a piece that requires me and I put myself in this comfort zone of playing piano, I have an album called Violent Yellow that's on Spotify. And there's three pieces that are piano pieces that I just ran through effects. I ran through pedals and I did all of them in one take. So I spent like days getting the take right. And the music was structurally improvised. So things in it were slightly different, but I had to find the perfect, by the perfect, I mean like the take that I could live with. And it was very uncomfortable for me. And sometimes the outboard effects would fail and I'm listening back as I'm playing and like, oh, can I live with that? Or do I need to do a new take? Like there's one thing that just went not great. And sometimes there's happy accidents, but achieving comfort, I think, we go to things that challenge us and we go to things that make us feel comfortable. So musically, that's in the creative process where I go. I want to have both and going back to that.
What's the toy or effect or whatever thing that you always find yourself like going back to? And it's like, oh yes, old reliable over here. I know that if I run something through that, I'll be more content with it.
Oh, that's a good question. There's a lot. I'll run things through my amps because I'll get some natural compression and usually some overdrive if I crank them, and then I can mic the speaker to the cab or whatever. I can mic that and get something interesting. Or if I want to do it in a slightly more controlled way, I can run it through like a tube streamer or like some kind of dirt box, some overdrive, distortion, or fuzz, and just go, DI right in. Or a tape, like I'll use a reel-to-reel player and I'll crinkle up the magnetic tape before, or I'll like I haven't changed this tape in a long time, so I just keep recording over it and it's totally degraded, but it gives me that, it takes off some of the high end and it muffles some of the lower frequencies, and I kind of know what I'm going to get, but I kind of don't know what I'm going to get. And so there's a precariousness to it of like, I know 95% of what I'm going to get, but there's that like 5% I'm like, ooh, that has a little pop in it. That's kind of cool. And it's subtle, or it took off a little bit more high end, or it didn't take off enough high end and I can change it up, do something else. So there's comfort.
Where are you struggling with musically? I think that, so I use that sort of to make an example is that like I know that I could be better at guitar, or I know that I could be better at piano. And it's like there's things that I want to do, or like instruments that I want to be able to play that, for example, I don't play drums. I wish I did. I wish I had drums or a space for them. Uh, and so there's songs I have in my head that I'm like, I wish I could play drums, but I'm just going to have to hire a drummer to play it. But like, there's sort of the musical areas where we're like stretching towards, and it's like, I want to be able to do that, but I'm not there yet. Where is that for you?
Yeah. So what you were talking about was maybe the concept of like virtuosity, and also the concept of like access. And I think that's probably a universal thing of like, we all wish we had some more chops, you know, to use like that phrase. Like, if we had more chops, I think just generally more chops. Sure. I get, you know, I'm working on a gig right now, playing some like funk music from the 70s that we're going to do like a COVID style concert. And I love that music. My chops though are like not the best with that, because at the end of the day, I'm like a sound maker. I'm a composer. Going back to like middle school band, I would play and I would change. I would like reharmonize things. And I remember we had a really like big dude for a band director, and he was kind of scary, and he would yell at me all the time. He's like, "What are you doing? What are you play the notes on the page?" Because I'm the only like clarinetist playing something like a fifth up, or, you know, and it was like, it sounds good, you know, and I didn't know theory at the point, so I was just going on ear. But I feel like I get there with guitars that I have this, in some context, a good habit of exploration and of reharmonizing or redoing things on guitar. But it's also a bad habit in this case, because I need to just play what's in the chart, you know? So I have to like control my urges to be a composer and like really focus myself. I feel like musically, because that's where I get a slice of my income, is gigging. And I'm getting a lot better at it, because I could play the things, but I get kind of lost in the moment. I'm like, oh, I want to play this. And I like see how much I can get away with. And like I push those boundaries a little too much sometimes, where the music director will be like, just don't play. If you're going to do that, just don't play this passage. I'm like, okay, that works too. I'm okay with not playing. So I think, you know, virtuosic chops, I'm there. And access, I also agree. I have percussion stuff laying around, and I just wrote a grant that I hopefully might get specifically for like a shell kit, you know, like a drum kit, and finding some like cheap used cymbals on Craigslist or something. So hopefully I'm right there with you. Like, your answer is my answer.
Yeah, there was a thing the other day that happened where like there was a piano, and it's like I feel the same way. Like I'm not good at piano, but we compose most of the time. Like I compose a lot of the time at the piano. And so it's like, it felt weird that like I was being looked at as like the music guy in front of a piano. And I was like, I have no idea what to do here. Even though like I know how to use the instrument, I know how to write things for it. I can make really cool stuff for it. But when it's my hands on the piano, it's like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. And to contextualize it, going back to a previous conversation, like, what is virtuosity? Virtuosity within what kind of music? Right. And like music,
having the ability to do something, that like being able to communicate the thing that's in your head into the instrument.
Okay. Well, that's yeah. Because I'm like, I'm never going to play like Rachmaninoff. Like I can't do that. I have, you know, my hands aren't built for that. My attention span isn't built to like train myself to do that either. Not that I have like a short attention span. It's just, I don't want to put that much stock into learning how to play that stuff. Not because I don't like it. It's just I'm not going to do that. But yeah, like what is virtuosity? And music literacy, I think, is oftentimes associated with sometimes virtuosity. And I think that's, I don't want to say an elitist way to look at things, but it is it is a strange way to look at things, because some of the best musicians I've ever met don't read a single thing about like notation. They don't know how to read notation. That doesn't make them lesser or better or worse or anything. But anyway, it's this classical lens through which we see everything. Virtuosity. There's a lot of virtuosic guitar players out there that could not read. Like classical guitar was my primary study, and I'm not as good of a guitarist as plenty of people that don't read that at all. And I have like chops and technique that is very coded within that world, but that doesn't. Yeah, like I struggle to play some things that are a little bit easier, quote unquote, like easier in terms of like mechanical placing of fingers. Yeah. Anyway, virtuosity is tough to define, though.
Yeah. Well, no, it is the weird struggle of like, there's a thing in my head, I need to get it out, and like that's actually, I think I heard a story from Ben Folds that like he like listened to records a whole lot, or like listened to the radio a whole lot, and he was like, whenever his family got a piano, he was like, I'm gonna play it. I'm just gonna play the songs that I love. And like he was a little kid then, and so he listened to the song and then like sat at the piano and was like, why can't I do the thing? I hear it so well, I know it really well, why can't I just do that? And yeah, that's the struggle I'm at with like every other instrument, is that like if you just substitute time for like skill, like I will totally spend every moment perfecting the sound so that someone else can do it.
Yeah, and that's your priority. Ben Folds, I grew up, I went to high school in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was in high school when Ben Folds was coming up in Raleigh. And so I went to go see him when he was like first starting out, and he's great, but he was not Ben Folds today. When I saw, no shade at him, like it was rough, and I liked that a lot. I really liked going to see him out at like, Berkeley Cafe and all those places up in Raleigh when I was a teenager. And he was not a teenager. He was a few years older than me.
Well, with no other way to end this conversation as other than just a tangent, thank you for doing this with me. Where can we find you and your things?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm glad we had some tough conversations and had like a very uncomfortable like hour at least, if not like hour and a half. Maybe 2 hours, I don't know.
Yeah, so plug your stuff, your website, and where we can find all your music.
Cool. Same website as the first block. I'm sure you'll link it on Anchor FM and all that. It's joshuamarquez.com. You can search for it in Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon. But if you go to my website, I have it linked. I have a Bandcamp also linked. And for those on social, you can follow me at Joshua Marquez Music. I don't have a Facebook or Twitter, though.
Thank you so much. This has been a really cool and enlightening conversation. So I'm Santiago Ramones.
Joshua Marquez. Thank you so much.
And now here's Mandala by Joshua Marquez from his album Violent Yellow. You can find everything that I do on my website, santiagoramones.com. I make music. I have an EP, a short album, that will be releasing on May 28th. It's 6 instrumental electronic tracks that didn't quite fit into a major release. It's called Soundbites, and it'll be the first of many EPs that include stray songs, pieces, or recordings. Be on the lookout for that, and follow me on Instagram to stay up to date with all the stuff that I'm doing, both at bit.depth and at Santiago Ramones Music. If you like the podcast, leave comments on social media, leave reviews saying how much you like the podcast, and tell your friends about it. I really couldn't be doing this without you, and I'm super grateful to continue doing Bit Depth for this long. Thank you so much for listening to and supporting Bit Depth. I always end the podcast with my 3 things. They shape my life philosophy. Love never fails. It's going to be okay. I might be wrong.